Hi, I'm Maldnik, and this is part 4 of my Let's Make a City Skylines Map series. So, in part 1 we talked generally about water physics. Part 2 we started making a new map, and this is a tropical map, and we decided on a general plan and made a general little outline. Then last episode we put in the heights of these peaks, made slopes for the river, and then slopes from the mountain ranges to the river so as to make some valleys. Now comes the time when we do some smoothing. We smooth it out, and then we'll put the detail onto that smoothed out version. But before we do that, we first need to rough it up a little bit more. We want to put a little bit of additional roughness, additional height generation onto this, so that when it smooths out, it's not just smoothing out slopes to make one nice smooth slope, it's also smoothing out some bumps and crevices. So we're just going to put a small strength brush, and it's going fairly large because we're not trying to make a detailed, nice looking thing. We just want to put a texture over the entire thing. And as I mentioned last time, there are parts of here, for instance there, which are below sea level. So we also need to make sure that we put enough texture onto those so that their height, when averaged out by the smoothing algorithm, will be above sea level. So let's just proceed to put some bumpiness. I like to use this lined one mainly because it has lots of gaps in it, and so it's a bit more random, but the problem with it is that it always faces the same way. You can't rotate the brush head. I'm going to gouge the slopes with this thing, this map brush, because obviously it's the bumpiest thing you're going to get in terms of map brushes. But the other thing, the problem with it is that it has a very distinctive pattern, and you can see it very easily. Like, oh, if it was flatter, I mean, you can notice all those holes. So currently I'm digging in holes, I'm not putting on height, and this is just going to give an eaten away, eroded sense to our slopes. Now we've finished putting the pitting on all of our slopes and just roughing things up a bit. As a final thing, we're just going to make sure that the coastline, actually that was too strong, coastline just has a bit of bumpiness. Ooh, really need to be careful here. Maybe use a different, because that will give us a more natural looking beachfront that isn't just flat. And at this point you might want to put some islands in, or some sandbars for instance. So if we wanted to put some kind of sandbar-y thing here, this might all be underwater when it gets smoothed out, but it will give the effect of making it not just a flat ocean bed, which, depending on your preferences and aesthetics, may be preferable. Now, choice of head for the smoothing, brush head for the smoothing, is sort of important, but on the other hand, you can get away with just using this. I mean, this is the biggest and most solid, smoothing you're going to get. And at this point in the map, we do want to just generally smooth. However, on the river we're going to need to use a smaller brush head, because otherwise we're going to lose all of that, because it's just going to average things out. However, because you're smoothing everything underneath that circle the same amount, and because it's being smoothed in the context of everything else on that brush head the same amount, it kind of is too uniform in a way. So often I prefer to use this as a smoothing brush. We're going to smooth the rivers last, because we don't want to be smoothing things and then, like, whatever you do first is essentially going to be doubled up. It's going to have the effects of the other terrain modifications that you're doing to things around it. So you leave the more delicate jobs to last, and you do the more hard jobs that you really want to, like, punch something in the face with the effect. You do that first, because you'll do it, and then in the course of smoothing out the rest of the map you might smooth near there again, and so yeah, you'd get a doubling up of the effect. We want all of the terrain to roughly look the same geological age, which means it needs to be roughly the same amount of roughness, the same amount of erosion, all those things. I'm sure you've played a Civ game and been asked how old do you want the Earth to be, so how contiguous the terrain zones are going to be. And here I'm doing the actual smoothing of the river with a very large. The reason why I'm using this large brush is because I just want to very precise. Well, I'm using the circle because I want to very precisely smooth without touching the river, because I'm going to smooth the riverbed by itself. If I smooth the slopes into the riverbed now, it's actually going to change the height level of the riverbed too much. We begin with the river. We use this brush because this brush is too straight, these are too square. So we need a roughly circle one, but we don't want one that is actually a circle, because that will make the edges of the riverbank too neat. I'm going to turn down the brush strength a bit, just so we don't make any mistakes. And we're gently going to smooth in the direction of the water. Well, in the direction of the river. It doesn't matter if you're going up or down river, but you don't want to be doing side to side motion, because that is going to smooth. It's going to bring the height of the river bank into the river. You want to bring the height of the river into the river bank. Okay, so now we look at the terrain topographic map, terrain heights. What is important here is that every single part of that transition is lower than the lowest point here. So what is that? That is there. We actually find that there is a bump just there. We are going to need to put some little surgery here. Okay, having resolved that crisis of topographic proportions, we shall now get to the randoming, or more naturalizing. So, as you can see, every mountain is the same height currently. That is boring. As you can see, the mountain ranges are continuous lines. That is boring. we need to remove all boringness from this universe. So what we are going to do is we are going to dig some rough valleys to the side of these mountains. We're going to put extra height on the top of these, which is why we did 700, because that gives us a lot of leeway to make some taller, some shorter. We also need to rough up these valleys, and I think we actually need an entirely new mountain here. So just splodge one down. How do we make things look better? We subtract and then we add. So here is a flat top. Subtract and then add the same thing, and because of the angle, the thing we're adding is actually going to add more to the bits that were sticking out before, so which was subtracted less. Now, having put some roughness back into the peaks, we're going to gently smooth things. And we're not going to try to smooth out the slopes, we're just trying to make it not obvious that we just put one brush over the entire thing. At this point, we now are going to dig out with this brush, which gives us the most specificity. I'm going to make the valleys go with what's already suggesting itself to you, and try not to make lines that are too straight. Try to curve. Try to just, I essentially use my lack of artistic skill to my advantage at this point, my inability to draw a proper line. So I just wiggle my hand around, and that creates a much more kind of real, naturally chaotic look. In terms of these larger peaks, what you're going to get is that this texturing that you've put on it is actually going to help you apply the brush, because it's going to cause some places to drop away a lot more than other places, just due to the way the brush is applying to the uneven ground in this system. So, having sort of broken up the mountains somewhat, even though you could argue that these do not look very good, these valleys, we're going to do a final roughing. Due to this being a tropical map, I feel that I can get away with a more volcanic look than I would otherwise. This kind of bumpier one is a lot more pitty, and thus looks a lot more volcanic or igneous in origin, to me at least. Looks like kind of bubbling basalt or something. So yeah, now we have finished our roughening of the surface again. The next step is to put terrain features and resources on, and that will be our final step, and then we can play this thing. So I will see you then.